Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Fireside chat on how to build a great cybersecurity strategy. On behalf of Burk I.T and Fortinet, I'd like to welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Lauren, and I'll be your moderator. I'm joined by security experts Darius Goodall and Ben Lawson. Before we get started, this session will be recorded and distributed after the event. If you have any questions, please put them in the questions panel and our experts will answer them live. So if there's something you've been wondering about, or maybe you have a question from the discussion today, we would love to weigh in. So with that, I will hand it over to Darius to start with introductions.
Hey folks, I'm Darius. I head up marketing here at Fortinet, or one of the segments of marketing here at Fortinet. Really pleased that you guys can join us here today. We've got a lot to talk about. I mean, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in the industry right now, and all of that translates into how we, as Fortinet and Burk I.T, our partner over here, can help you guys make a great cybersecurity plan to defend your business, protect your employees, protect your data and your intellectual property. I've been in the industry now for going on 10 years on the security side, but I've been a career person on the networking side as well. And it's very interesting. One of the things that we'll talk about is that convergence of networking security. Those two things have notoriously been absolutely separate. If you look at larger organizations as well, they are still separate today, right? There's a networking team, there's a security team, and quite often these two teams don't actually talk to each other very often. But what Fortinet does is very unique, and you'll hear about this today, is the convergence of networking security. It's that important because there are so many places where somebody or an attack can take place on your network, and that you can augment that with security. So with that, I'm going to give equal opportunity over here to Ben, our partner from Burk I.T. Ben, say hello, introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself and your company and so on.
Sounds great. Thank you, Darius. It's a pleasure to be here. I am with Burk I.T. I serve as Burk's general manager. Burk I.T. has been around since 1996. We are a managed service provider in the Southeast. We're based out of Kingsport, Tennessee, so the northeast part of Tennessee. Really, we've been serving folks in this area for more than 25 years with a dedicated focus on infrastructure management, remote and on-site support for a variety of customers at a variety of different tier levels. But really, our primary focus has been in the area of IT security, integrating IT security with all that we do for our clients, focusing on both endpoint security, edge security, awareness training, CISO type functionality for our clients. So we really dabbled in a lot of different areas. We've got a lot of experience on the compliance and regulatory side of the house as well. Our two primary verticals are in the medical space and in the financial institution space. So we've really cut our teeth in heavily regulated industries and been able to provide that expertise to a lot of our clients. Personally, I've been in the field for almost 25 years now, over 25 years now, almost 26 years in network infrastructure, IT security management, compliance, data governance. I've worked in a lot of those different spaces. So really looking forward to discussing cybersecurity plans and how we can help our clients.
Good deal, Ben, and thank you for your partnership. We really appreciate you. All right, let's start up this conversation. All right, and I think, Ben, one of the best places to start a conversation over here is to look at the weather outside, so to speak, right? What is the state of what's going on in the industry? Why are we being attacked? How are we being attacked, and so on? So what's your perspective? What have you seen? You're on the front lines over there. What are you seeing in terms of the types of attacks and why people are being attacked right now?
That's a really great question. It's been a bit of an evolving target approach over the last 2 or 3 years. We were 3 or 4 years ago dealing with just the emergence of cloud and a lot of people moving their data off premise into the cloud. And then we dealt with a pandemic where that process escalated. People moved a lot more data to the cloud a lot more quickly. People went home. We had a mobile workforce that went from 2 or 3% of our end users to probably 20 or 30% of our end users, basically overnight. And I think the cyber criminal base really took advantage of that. They took advantage of the nature of the hardware people were using, the environments they were coming from. They weren't coming from hardened enterprise networks any longer. They were coming from home networks. So they took advantage of the porous nature of that situation, the fact that it really was just endpoint security at that point, so they could do a lot more. And then we've seen on top of that really the maturity of social engineering. Gone are the days where we're worried about just putting a strong edge defense up because you're going to have a bunch of hackers in hoodies trying to attack firewalls and break into offices and into network segments. They're now targeting the human, who has always been the weakest link, and doing a very, very good job of that. So you've got a lot of aspects to security now that we didn't focus on even 3-4 years ago.
Yeah, those are all good points, right? I mean, we saw, as a vendor, we saw exactly that as well, right? Essentially what happened was, people were originally, before pre-pandemic, and I don't want to spend too much time talking about the pandemic, but it is important. Everybody was sat in their office space, right? And we have this so-called perimeter security, which is given to us by a traditional firewall, right? Well, all of that blew up. Everybody went home, and then what we talk about is we say that all these different edges have been created. You just mentioned we're putting stuff up in the cloud. That's a new edge. We put stuff, we put employees at home with, they're cohabitating with other people. What's their security posture and so on. So really, what this led to was, the hackers. It's just like a hacker's delight. It really is an attacker's delight, because all the old tools that they had, or they have in their war chest right now, all they needed to do was just unpack them. They were still effective. In fact, even more so, because the fact that edge security, or this perimeter security, has been broken. So there's definitely a lot to talk about there. There's ransomware, there's, as you said, social engineering. The human firewall element of this is one of the most important, and something that organizations need to address on a very regular basis as well. But there's damage done as well from a different perspective. When we were thrown into this, right, what we saw was a lot of organizations they're hustling to go equip their employees, and they kind of patchworked things together, right? And as humans, what we do is, when we patch things together, we also have a tendency to say, after a period of time, good enough, let's just keep it going, everything's just working like it is, without really going back and revisiting, because that's a massive amount of resource, especially for the small to medium-sized businesses, is to go back and reevaluate what your security posture is now that you've patched things up to make them work. And of course, as you said, other things started to suffer in certain ways. Intellectual property was being thrown all over the place, right? People were putting stuff on Box, on Dropbox, or whatever it is, not on the servers back at home. So literally, we just started to lose control of all of the company's intellectual property. And as we start to think about bringing those employees back, we've got this whole different issue, which is, how do we reclaim our intellectual property? Where the hell is it? Right? How do we stop people putting stuff out there in unsanctioned places? And how do we recreate, our security posture? So those are all good things. And this ransomware thing, absolutely prevalent. It hasn't died down whatsoever. And we've been hearing about this now for years, 10 years or so, right? And like I said, all they're doing is just unpacking the same tools. So endpoint security, or proactive endpoint security, regardless of where your employees are, is really, really important. And we'll talk about that in terms of the way we go to this. So Ben, one of the questions I've got for you is, how does a business go about determining their risk level right now? Where do you start?
That's a really great question, and one of the areas that we've really tried to help our clients evolve, because to your point, the game has changed. Where the data is different. How the users are accessing the data is different. Where they're accessing the data from has changed. So you really have to step back and just completely reboot your business impact analysis, risk assessment process, and say, where is our information? We've got to define, is it in this cloud segment? Have we moved these services to the cloud? Are they hosted on their own premise? Where are our users? How are they coming in? How are we managing those devices? So do we have clients on all of those mobile devices? Are they working from devices assigned to them from the business, or are they using a BYOD strategy? And can we control that? Have we addressed authentication appropriately to make sure that that we're authenticating these users, that we have some concept of zero trust, so that they're not just wide open once they connect? So to your point, once the bad guys break out those tools and get in, that they don't have a free-for-all with all the data that is available to them. So it really is a mechanism of stepping back, defining your environment, and then really assessing risk at each level really doing it anew. You can't fall back and say, well, we did this 2 or 3 years ago, we're fine. We have to look at things with new eyes and understand the threats.
Yeah, I mean, what we saw as well in talking to AWS and Azure was actually the whole effort of actually moving people home in a hurry there, and then redesigning people's infrastructure, let alone security infrastructure alone. Advanced or pushed forward cloud technology by a period of 10 years. Adoption was increased by about 10 years. Really amazing. But what we also saw, and what AWS reported back to us, is that this hurried adoption of cloud came with its own problems, right? And that was maintaining a decent security posture along with it, and enabling that. Now we've moved to actually sort out some of these things as a vendor as well. We've introduced a number of different teleworking solutions, one of which is actually from a company called Linksys. I'm sure you've all heard of that one. Fortinet has a 50% stake in Linksys, and what we did is we took all of our threat detection technology, as well as a lot of our know-how, into what was essentially a gateway device, and expanded that, right? And so really elegant solution. So now what you get is a Linksys home working solution, which is a cheaper way of actually enabling security at anybody's house or your employee's house. And all it is it's a Linksys box, but it actually broadcasts 2 SSIDs. There's one there for your home network, so your kids can get onto Steam or whatever it is that they do. But the other one is a corporate SSID, right? So your wireless network is your corporate wireless network, and that tunnels straight back into your corporate network, right? So it's as if you're sitting at the office, and over the top of that is all the threat protection that we can offer. But Fortinet is a substantial player in the industry right now. We're, if not probably the biggest, one of the biggest, cybersecurity companies out there. We see in our systems over 15 billion threats a day, right? That's how many customers we've got. That's how many sensors, so to speak, that we've got that see all these threats that are going on in the industry. And so, being able to have that visibility is very, very important. And the next important thing about that is, of course, what do you do with it? You've got all this network intelligence, or this threat intelligence, as we say. Now you've got to do something with it. And of course, all of that is fed down into all of our products, right? And when we say all of our products, it's the networking, the firewalling side of it, the web security side of it, the client side of it, and all that intelligence is brought down in there, so that when they see traffic passing in front of them, they can very quickly and immediately identify these threats and stop them, right? Stop them in their tracks, right? So that's the next part of what we should talk about, Ben, is what parts of people's infrastructure are actually being attacked, and how do we go about stopping those attacks?
That's a very good point, because when you think about, as you just described, that mentality we really need to have around a security fabric with all the right layers in place, so many parts and pieces are being attacked, and they're using all of these advancements against us to an extent. I've had conversations recently with clients around the value of being able to do SSL inspection through their firewall, and that's not something we worried about even a few years ago, but the cyber criminals are using that encryption as a mechanism to inject content into a network that otherwise would have been called as a standard type of packet. So the fact that we need to be able to break down and look at those encrypted packets, the fact that we need to have visibility all the way to the endpoint and know what all is happening on that environment has become critical. I mean, the concept of the cloud, as you talked about, the huge advancement in cloud adoption came with sort of this mentality for a lot of people that if I hand it off to the cloud, then I don't have to worry about security any longer. That's the cloud vendor's responsibility, so I'm good. But to your point, we still need to know where that traffic is going, what people are using, what services, make sure we don't have that shadow IT aspect of things where they're off using their own cloud services. And you really need to understand all of that as it comes back through, and really analyze that data to know what are we using it, how are we using it, and are we using it appropriately? Do we have the right security controls in place?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Great point. And one of the things that actually comes to mind is I think it was around about 4 years ago that Google actually reported that it was close to 90% of the traffic was now SSL encrypted. So for those of us perhaps that don't understand what SSL encryption means, Ben, give us a very quick overview of what the implications of that actually is.
The simple truth is, to your point, everyone has become accustomed to look for that little lock in their web browser. Is there a little lock popping up in my browser? Am I using that HTTPS site versus HTTP site? At the end of the day, it means all of that web traffic, everywhere that you're going, it's encrypted. It's in a tunnel that the firewall can't necessarily see without the right configuration, without the right certificates in place. So the bad guys are hiding that malicious payload inside of that encrypted tunnel, trying to obscure it, trying to make it hard for the tools to detect, so it's easier to inject it into your network. So we've had to adapt to that and understand that there are tools you have to have in place, configurations. You have to be using a unified threat management platform that can look at that traffic, that can drop it off to a sandbox and analyze what's going on, or that threat can easily enter your network, or worse, enter your endpoint at your home network, and bad things can happen.
Yeah, so excellent point, right? I mean, the key here is to what you said is if you are not decrypting that traffic at your perimeters or your checkpoints specifically, right, your security checkpoints, then all of that malicious content, regardless of whether you're doing an email, whether you're doing web browsing, or it's on a file server, or whether it's on a web server or something like that, unless you're able to decipher that traffic, you're missing the whole picture over here, right, as it relates to web traffic. And that's very, very important. Web pages are constructed these days to have multiple options. So you go out there looking for something that you're actually trying to download, and suddenly, before you know it, there's like 1,000 download buttons or press here buttons. Any one of those could be a landmine for you, right? And you can't just trust yourself. I mean, the human firewall element of that is really, really important. You shouldn't just go around clicking on things randomly. Of course, you've got to read and that's easy to say because I want instant gratification right now, right? So people just click on whatever they can, and before they know it, they've stepped on a mine, or they might not know it actually as well, right? And you started the download of something that you really didn't want. Everybody's experienced that because it starts loading some weird software on your computer, but sometimes it's malicious. But so here's the point: taking that traffic, taking that stream of traffic, and as we call it, cracking it, right, to actually decrypt it, is a very labor-intensive process, right? A lot of companies do this in software, and when you do it in software, it has the side effect of dragging down processor time, right? So it's a lot. It's very, very, very intensive. What Fortinet does is this is a function of our firewall. We are probably the only vendor right now that actually does custom ASICs on our firewalls that are designed to crack this traffic at hardware speeds. When you do things in hardware, it's a heck of a lot faster than doing it in software. So we have dedicated processors just for this. So we can almost do this now actually at wire speed. It's 10 times faster than our closest competitor right now, and that's one of the massive benefits of doing this. Now, we're talking about the firewall over here, right? You need to be able to do this in web application firewalls as well, and web servers, which is the UTM piece that you're talking about, Ben. But equally important, and very, very important, is that we also recognize that not everybody is always sat behind a firewall. And if you're not sat behind a firewall, or there's a firewall in the path, then you're exposed, right? And this is where, a very important element of creating a great security plan is, one, to understand, of course, the threat. The second part is to understand how threats actually get in. We've talked about the firewall here. Okay, the next most important thing that we really need to talk about is as well, your individual perimeter security, and that comes in the form of client security, right? Endpoint security. Ben, talk to us a little bit about that and the importance of that. What are the advances in endpoint security as well?
No, it's an absolutely vital component of any IT security strategy today. And as I've told many folks, I'll say again today, traditional antivirus, as we have known it, is truly dead, in that we can no longer rely on just a basic piece of software that downloads definitions even multiple times a day to say, okay, we've identified a new bug, here you go. We've identified a new bug, here you go. We have to move beyond that to have something that can do behavioral analysis, that can understand the activity that's going on at the endpoint level. I could tell a dozen stories of clients who have seen zero-day attacks. Zero-day meaning they received a bug. They had a trusted vendor who sent an email, or someone clicked on the link that they shouldn't click on and downloaded some software that was not known to the world at that time. There was no known virus definition. There was no way to defend against that without a tool that could actually understand the behavior of the client. They could look at what's going on with the network, what's going on with the application, what's the end user's behavior with this application, and does this violate a norm? So that's why we've seen this hugely important move to what we call now EDR, or endpoint detection and response tools that can actually say, I understand how this endpoint normally behaves. I'm seeing abnormal behavior and I need to quarantine or stop that traffic in some way. It is absolutely a requirement for anyone who wants to have a mature cybersecurity footprint for the organization. We mandate it for all of our clients that are in any of our managed services agreements. So.
Yeah, I mean, it really is almost one of those things right now, truthfully, the way that, the work dynamic has changed. People on the road, people are road warriors, salespeople, whatever it is, or just working from home, that this is possibly one of the most important places to actually start, right? Along up there with a firewall for sure. And as you say, Ben, I mean, antivirus as we know it, which is just installing some kind of application from Norton and so on, is just not enough, right? These older systems used to work on definitions, as you say, and a security definition. In other words, it can only operate in a world in which it understands whatever's being sent at it, right? It can only recognize the viruses and the types of attacks that it knows about. That's not enough, right? That's not enough. You have to be way more sophisticated than that. You have to talk. We have to be able to recognize, the patterns or the types of attacks that we don't yet know about, but that they have certain types of behaviors and effects on a computer or on a person or on a system that we have to determine as suspicious and label up as suspicious. Now, even that's not enough, right? We're already starting to talk about, or what I'm talking about now is EDR, right? But we now need to be able to go a level deeper. Is once we've identified that we are being attacked, now we need to question what is it that we do with this, because that isn't always clear. So, Ben, tell us a little bit more about how EDR playbooks and all that kind of stuff comes into an important realm here.
You bring up a very good point in that it's no longer enough to just even detect the threat, but you have to have that mechanism to say, how do I respond to this threat? Can it alert my other systems, roll up to my staff, or roll up to a third-party mechanism and say, hey, there's something bad going on here, and we need to take action to remediate and stop this behavior. And to your point, playbooks are a great way to accomplish that. Do you have and need to have the question you ask is, do you have a solution that can do this? The answer is you need a mechanism that can evaluate that can quarantine that traffic when necessary, alert the right individuals, possibly disable network ports or disable network access to make sure, bad things aren't being injected into the environment, because obviously a threat's been detected. And you have to log that, be able to evaluate that over time, and have that forensic path to know, how did, once I've detected something, how did it get here? What was the user behavior or the network behavior that led to that? So you can go plug that hole. So you can go make sure it doesn't happen again at the technology level, but then also go train your users and explain, this is the type of threat that happens. So let's add some awareness training on top of this to prevent this from happening if it was a human interaction that allowed this to infiltrate the network or infiltrate an endpoint.
Yeah, really, really good point. Really good points, right? Now, before we go into how do we make sense of all of this stuff that's going on, right, and all these different systems you're talking about, the last and possibly the most important that we must talk about is actually email security, right? Email continues to be the number one exploited mechanism for injecting threats into your environment. Today, still 90% of attacks start over there. A really great example of this is actually an older attack, which was actually Target stores. I mean, everybody recognizes that. That's a household name. Now, Target stores, what they did is that attack actually started as an email attack, not on Target though, right? That attack actually started with one of their HVAC vendors, right? And and I'll explain this over time as we go through this call or this session. But what it did is the attackers started the attack on a vendor, on an HVAC vendor, right? An authorized HVAC vendor. And all they did is they just dropped in an email, which was literally an email that was looking for usernames and passwords, right? Phishing information. It could have been as simple as Target wants you to update your username and password for your vendor portal, which is Target's vendor portal, how they go in to reconcile their invoices and so on. And they put a link down there. Now, this is very, very cunning. This is very, very cunning because this small HVAC company, who really didn't have much in the way of security controls or even human firewall capabilities, was the beginning of the fall of this massive attack. And so in this email was a link for this vendor to go click on, right, which takes them to a spoofed page, which is the vendor portal, right, which it allows people to actually get in and get paid, submit invoices, work orders, all that, retrieve work orders and all that kind of stuff, right? And so, and what that did is when they're spoofing that page, the first thing, what it is, like when you have to reset a password, the first thing it asks you is, what's your username? What is your current password? What's your new password? Well, they don't care about the new password. They just stopped at the what's your current password. Now, everything from there on happens at the speed of light, all right? Because it's all automated. These guys are not some guy sitting in a garage. These guys are actually better resemble a brick and mortar organization with HR departments, with R&D departments, all that kind of stuff, and they've automated absolutely everything. But before we carry on with this attack, or this is what happened next in this attack, we've got to talk about email security. We've got to talk about the human firewall. We've got to talk about stopping your employees from just clicking on stuff, willy-nilly, and what tools are actually available. Ben, talk to us a little bit more about your experiences here.
We could spend the rest of the time just talking about the nature of email security and how these types of attacks have affected our clients. But the things you have to think about, you have to have a good gateway defense. You have to have something between the internet and your email system, whether it is hosted exchange at Microsoft, whether you have a server on site, whether you're using Google or some other third party. You really have to have an email gateway mechanism that is inspecting that mail, looking for that type of malicious content, filtering out those phishing attacks, filtering out those malicious spam attacks and embedded links and all of that kind of good stuff. You have to train your folks. You have to have a very robust awareness training platform, because at the end of the day, you're still going to see things pass through because you've got a trusted vendor. It may be an address that you've whitelisted because you expect that invoice to come from vendor A or vendor B, and therefore it's going to hit your inbox. So you have to train your folks. You have to do some awareness training with actual phishing exercises. So send them some messages, see how they react. Depending on how they react, provide that remediation training. You've got to have really good inspection at the endpoint, that right, if they click on that link, there's something that can defend against that. And back to our EDR conversation, making sure that we've protected against that, even if the user makes the mistake. And then really the last thing that we spend a lot of time on is the fact that a lot of these attacks are trying to harvest credentials that are then going to a cloud service and not going inside your network. So you may not have the right security controls on those credentials for those cloud services. So doing things like require multi-factor authentication if you're accessing something from outside of the organization's footprint is a huge step in security for folks that could give up credentials in one of those phishing attacks.
Yeah, exactly right. Now look. We said a lot of things over there, right? The human firewall element of one of which is very, very, very important. And there are tools. There are tools available for you to actually test your employees as well, right? And that is that these are system-generated tests which are designed, right, just like the attackers do, to get your employees to start to click on things, right? And then if they click on things, then we start a whole different process, which is email security training, right? And so on. So all of that is actually available through Fortinet and through Burk I.T, right? And it's very, very important. In actual fact, even here at Fortinet, right, where you would expect this problem to manifest itself the least, we actually employ this as a security measure in-house, because we have people from all sorts of trades, from accounting departments to graphics departments and so on, and their first line of business is not necessarily security like yours. All right, so people still click on stuff. And if they click on it, we send them through training to make sure that they click, that they stop clicking, they think, right? And there's all sorts of things that These training courses will bring up to you to prepare you so that you can recognize an email that you weren't expecting or that looks very, very odd. And as Ben said as well, look, there's other software here on top of it. Look, I'm not going to tell you right now that Microsoft security or Google security for their email services is inadequate. I'm not going to tell you that at all, right? But attacks are still happening today, and you can let's face it, that's what it is. Security isn't built up by one layer, by saying Microsoft is secure. Security is built up by multiple layers of defenses to make it actually effective, right? And that's why we're saying you need to have, just like Ben said, you need to have these extra mechanisms that can recognize a certain type of threat and do something with it. Again, I'm going to refer back to this because I'm going to culminate this conversation with this 15 billion events that Fortinet sees every single day. And we see that across all these, what we call these threat vectors. A vector is a path along which a threat can travel, such as email, such as web, such as social engineering on an iPhone, and so on, right? But somehow we've got to bring all of this together, all this intelligence together, and make a unified defense against that. That's really, really important. Let's carry on. Let's carry on this conversation in the terms of the target conversation, because this is kind of an interesting analogy and an interesting build on here. So look, the attackers have got to this point now in time where they've got a username and password that they've actually allowed the attackers to get into this portal that they've announced. So number one issue that target had, believe it or not, was a social engineering problem, right? It wasn't email, it was social engineering. They published the list of their approved vendors up on a website that said, all of these vendors are approved. And essentially, if I can add that up together, it says these guys have access to this payment portal, which would allow them to get into my system. And getting into my system is really where I want to get to. So this is just like the directory of who to attack of small vendors that probably don't have any form of security or security awareness. That is a great place to start, right? So problem number one, that site does now no longer exist, of course, and shortly very quickly vanished. But then the second part of this was, attacking a small organization, not target itself, and now we've got into the server. All right, so now things get a little bit more sophisticated and beyond the level of this conversation. But then what happened was we're actually interfacing with a different security product at this point in time, and that's a web application firewall, right? WAF, as we call it, which is there to protect your web-based applications, right? Now, what they do at this point is a SQL injection, right? And that SQL injection, I won't go into the details of that, it's a little bit more complicated. But what it does is it results in, when they start finding holes in this very specific firewall, it's not a traditional firewall, it's a web application firewall, results in them finding some vulnerabilities in this application, which get them a step further. Anyway, to cut that story short, what then happened was they were then able to change the level of the credentials, the priorities of the credentials, to admin status, right? So now they actually gain control of the WAF, right? And it's a very difficult process. This is where I'm saying to you guys that these guys are very, very sophisticated, and they can actually up-level the level of their credentials and take control of these things. Now, something very interesting had happened as well. Target had actually just taken possession of early detection and prevention systems, and these systems were just actually screaming at this point in time. But they were brand new, and these systems take time to actually tune. It wasn't, I don't know which vendor it was. Actually, I do know which vendor it was, but we'll talk about that. And what happens is you have to tune these systems, otherwise they just kind of scream at you all the time. And this is what Burk I.T is more tuned to, right? When they provide you with these services, they've already got these systems all set up, and their responsibility is to actually watch these systems. Whereas Target had actually just taken possession of this thing, and the IT administrator, literally, or security administrator, looked at this thing and got fed up with it and silenced it, right? There was an attack happening right there in front of them, right? But they silenced the alarm system that was telling them to do something. Anyway, the long and short of it is another part of the conversation that we now need to have is once these guys had got access to the network, the next part of the problem manifested itself, right? Which was what we call lateral movement. Ben, talk to us about lateral movement, what that means and why that's so important in the face of an attack.
Lateral movement is your biggest risk once someone gets, what we like to call a toehold on your network. They've landed somewhere. They're starting, as you described, Darius, to beat against certain devices, to eventually gain hold of certain systems, be able to get elevated privileges. Then, to your point, they can start moving laterally. They can start moving from system to system, from resource to resource, and gaining data that had nothing to do with their initial entry point, had nothing to do with the access to that payment portal or that invoicing portal. They found their way ultimately to the point of sale environment, which is catastrophic for an organization like Target, because then you've exposed customer data, you've exposed card numbers. Horrible things can happen at that point. That's where you have to have dedicated energy placed into your environment to say, have we segmented? Have we put firewalls and VLANs and segmentation between critical pieces of infrastructure? Are we monitoring those things? Do we understand what traffic should pass from server A to server B, or from network segment A to network segment B? So to your point, that comes back to that security fabric that is so important to make sure that your switches are configured properly, to make sure your firewalls have those demilitarized zones, those segments defined properly, to make sure that you have visibility to all of those things. And one of the things that has come from the compliance standards over the last several years is really stress the need for organizations to have a baseline understanding of how their network performs. Back to your example of that security engineer who silenced the system. He didn't know what his baseline was. The tool was still learning. He didn't know, is this abnormal or is it not? I just know it's annoying, so I'm going to sort of set it off to the side. But you have to know, how should I normally perform, and then what is abnormal. And then once you know what is abnormal, then you can watch and say, okay, traffic from system A should not be trying to access system B. There should be alarms going off. I should be reacting to this in some way.
Yeah, they're all good points, right? And we'll come to the fabric, which is very, very important in a second. But to finish off this story, I think Ben kind of alluded it. The holy grail of really where these guys are trying to get to is the payment information. Now, what Target didn't do was, like Ben said, segment their network. In other words, allow certain parts of the network to talk to other parts of the network, or prohibit it, right? Now, the end of the story of this is very simple. They got access to the payment machines. They installed shim software in there, which basically had the effect of exfiltrating very, very slowly all the credit card information to a server, which was just outside the demilitarized zone, or the DMZ, which was just outside the other side of the firewall there. And they exfiltrated that data very, very slowly, because when you do it en masse, all right, the systems at a company like that should be able to tell you that there's a massive exfiltration going on and, react, right? But that's another thing. That's another thing. So the damage is now done, right? So there is an important part to this, and you can say, okay, well, we're not Target stores, of course, and that doesn't really apply to us. But there's another way of looking at this, right? And it's from a user perspective, what happens from within inside or outside your network. Application control is very, very, very important, all right? I started out this conversation talking to you about when we were all sent home, people are loading things up onto Box or Dropbox as opposed to your file servers. You need to stop people from being able to do that. And that's application control, right? If you've got unsanctioned applications in your infrastructure, those alone are a threat. Not necessarily with a virus or something like that, but it's your intellectual property. You need to know where it is, right? In this example. So our firewalls, are aware of tens of thousands of applications, and you can decide through a list which ones are sanctionable or unsanctioned, right? That's one side of it. So now you're gaining control, all right, of your intellectual property, and you're stopping the people putting things where they don't belong. Put them back on the file server, all right? And literally today, I can tell you that Dropbox is an unsanctioned application here at Fortinet, and if I try to use anything put any Fortinet product or information or files on Dropbox, the system will stop me. Right? Now, there's another side to this as well, is when it comes to application control, back to what Ben said in terms of segmentation, let's stop people from gaining access to applications or parts of the network where they don't belong. In other words, why is the technical support guy would he ever have access to, or even network level access to, the finance servers? That's a threat. That's a problem. Now, you might not think that the tech support guy is doing anything malicious. He probably isn't. But if he's got some kind of malware that's trying to tunnel its way or move laterally, as Ben said, across your infrastructure to find the Holy Grail, which is the finance server, then you've got a problem. It wasn't the tech support guy's fault. It was something that a worm or something that was installed, or malware that was installed on his network, on his device. Right? So now you can start to see what we've been talking about over here: endpoint control, network segmentation, application control, email security. All of these things must come together in how we would create a great cybersecurity plan. Now, let's wrap up this conversation into what Ben touched on there, which is the fabric. All right, because the biggest problem that we see these days, all right, is there are thousands of vendors out there, security vendors out there, who all say we are the best of breed. I am absolutely the best at doing email security. I'm the best at doing firewalls. I'm the best at doing web security. I'm the best at doing WAFs, right? And if you were to go down that route, and that's okay, right? There are some drawbacks to it. It's very attractive because you want the best, right? The problem now comes as, on average, and this is the truth, right? We've done a survey of over 300 to 500 SMB companies. They have on average 16 different security systems in their infrastructure. Ben, what's the problem with that?
Well, do you want the entire list? I don't know that we have enough time left, but to be honest, I mean, it comes down to management and visibility and the interoperability of these tools. You have to have a mechanism to come in and say, I have a competency in all of these different tools. I understand how they work. You have to then figure out, can I have these tools communicate with each other and or not conflict with each other and try and stop each other's beneficial processes from running. And then you have the visibility and monitoring piece. How do I keep up with all of these things? What am I looking at? How many dashboards do I have up on my screen? What did I miss because this tool is not talking to this tool? So it does become critical that you have a consistent, coherent approach to cybersecurity with all of your tools. I mean, we've seen it as we've come into new clients. You'll walk into a new client shop and there's great technology, but there's 9, 10, 12 different pieces there, and no one has an understanding of all of them. So no one is keeping an eye on all of them. No one is monitoring them. No one is taking advantage of those tools because they're simply too dispersed and too heterogeneous in that environment. So.
Yeah, exactly right. So that's one aspect of it, right? So is the IT department, and everybody has scarce resources, right? At the small to medium-sized businesses, we don't have dedicated resources to put behind all of these different consoles. Now, here's the next part of it. I mean, what Ben talked about there is, being an expert in all of those. But that expertise can go south really, really fast when something starts going wrong. Okay, so let's say you get an attack, and one of those consoles, all of those consoles suddenly start screaming at you, saying something's wrong. What do you do, Ben? Which one do I believe? Which one do I do? And what do I do next?
Exactly. That's the $1 million question. And sadly, it really has become the multi-million-dollar question for a lot of organizations, because that's the cost. Once that ransomware takes hold or that malicious software runs around the network and does its damage. So you have to, at that point, figure out a way, how do I correlate this data? How do I figure out what system A is telling firewall B is telling switch C, and what does all this mean? And it can be very time consuming. And in this case, time is almost universally money, because the longer it happens, the more you've lost, the worse your reputational hit is. And frankly, the more risk there is that your organization may not survive that attack.
Yeah. I mean, look, it sounds terrible. And for a lot of enterprise type companies, this is a multi-million-dollar question, right? It is. But also recognize that for the people on this call, we don't have multi-million dollars to throw at this, right? So, and the other element of what you said there is time. Time is of the essence. And honestly, if the reality is, and when we talk to people that are being attacked, if you're in that situation where you even have to look at one console and try and determine what's going on, it's already too late, because all of these attacks are automated. They happen at the speed of light. Ransomware can move faster than you can even think or even say the word, right? And the problem's already done. Okay, so let's bring this home, right? We've talked about all the different attack vectors, the different types of attacks, the mechanisms of attacks, the mechanisms from which how attacks can move laterally and so on, whether it's external or whether it's internal or whatever. But now what we need to do is bring this home and put all of this together into something that's manageable and meaningful for a company that's the size of a small to medium-sized business. And that's what we call at Fortinet here, the fabric, right? So Ben, give us a little bit of an overview of the fabric and how it works and why it makes such a difference.
At the end of the day, the fabric is making sure that all of these tools are working together, that they're synchronized with one another, communicating, they're flowing up to a single console that can correlate all of that data, that can actually give you that single alert, and not only give you that alert, but be able to take action on that alert all the way from the endpoint through the network segments to the firewall to your internet exposure, and say, we've logged it, we understand it, we've alerted to it properly, and we've taken action to stop it. And that's really all of those components coming together and working successfully. And it's working successfully at every layer of your network and every way you interact with your network, whether you're accessing your network remotely, whether you're accessing it wirelessly in your environment, whether you're connected to a physical wire at your desktop. There is visibility to all of those things, and all of those resources can work together to mitigate and ultimately eliminate these threats.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. All right. So what we said in there was automation, we said visibility, and we said control, right? So let me give you an example of what Ben just said. And this is what's unique about Fortinet. I'm going to put it into the context of what you guys should be thinking about next. First of all, we start at the firewall, right? The firewall is the most essential part of it. It's gonna crack your SSL traffic to look for attacks. It's got firewall, so permissions. It's got VPN technology in there. It's got web security in there. All this UTM type protections. Very, very important. But here's one of the most important things in there. This is where we define our security policy. All right. This is where we defined, this is what works and what doesn't work in our security world, all right? As opposed to doing this in multiple different vendors, 16, that was the average, to redefine it there. Look, I want to change policy once and implement it everywhere, all right? That's my ideal world. That's what we're talking about. And that makes it manageable, and it reduces the possibility of human error. All right. Next thing that happens is Ethernet switching in the networking side of this. All right. When you take a Fortinet Ethernet switch and you plug it into the firewall, the magic happens. It becomes the firewall, right? All the firewall ports and all that policy is now extended out into the Ethernet switch. When you take a Fortinet access point and you plug it into the Ethernet switch, it becomes the firewall through the Ethernet switch, and all the policy is pushed down to the edge. When you take FortiClient or EDR and you plug it into the network or attach to the AP, it becomes part of the security infrastructure and downloads policy and talks to all of the other devices in the fabric to create a coordinated and secure environment. All right. So all that policy that we defined up there is now down at the bottom. So when somebody comes in with a problem, or they're sitting there working away and somebody downloads something malicious, a number of different things happen that are automated. First of all, the client says, I'm having problems, and immediately starts quarantining or taking remedial action to limit the damage on that device, if not prevent the damage on that device. But that's not enough. What we need to do is we need to communicate with the AP, and the AP is communicating with our threat prevention system to recognize all of these threats and communicate to all the other devices on your network. And what's happened now is, before you know it, that device has been quarantined and put onto a different VLAN to separate it from being able to take that traffic and it travel laterally to any other applications or other parts of the network. All right. Immediately, a notification is set up to Burk I.T or your IT manager or something like that to say, this guy's in trouble. We've quarantined him. Everything's safe, but we've automatically remediated the situation. Now you need to step in and finish up, do the cleanup or whatever it is before we can let this person get back on the network. All right. And that could happen all the way up from the email client level, right? So this guy's clicked on this email, boom, something's happened. communicate with client, quarantine everything, move this person aside onto a different VLAN or whatever it is to make sure that nothing propagates across, right? Nobody else is going to do that for you. Fortinet does that. We've done what we call the integration of this stuff. Now, okay, finally, what I will say is that this isn't limited to the Fortinet world, all right? We have in our Fabric ecosystem, and now, Fabric should start to understand, you should start to understand what Fabric is. Fabric is the interconnection of all the Fortinet devices, of which there are 50 different products in our portfolio that make up solutions that are all integrated into this Fabric, that all come together, right, and work together. But there's more than that. Inside the Fabric, we have an ecosystem of technology partners. So if you have other devices, what we're not saying here today is you need to throw all of that away and start again, right? You can keep, as long as they're in our Fabric ecosystem, they're already certified to actually work and integrate with Fortinet products. And it's really important that you do that. You work with Burk to actually do that and to find out, how you can integrate those into your infrastructures. Don't throw it all away. That's not what we're saying. The other thing that we're saying is, look, this is enterprise level security. This is the multi-millions that Ben was talking about, but it doesn't cost you multi-millions. It's not, you don't have to have multi-million-dollar deep pockets to get enterprise level security at a small to medium-sized business. Fortinet is very affordable. It's very, very high value inside those products to help you get to that. And a lot of the features and functions that you would buy in another product are actually free inside Fortinet, such as SD-WAN, right? Such as web security gateway and so on. All those functions are inside there. So I strongly urge you, talk with Ben and team over at Burk I.T. and get an idea of what it takes for you guys to create a great security posture and build a great security plan with these guys, because they've experienced this. As you can see, they're knowledgeable, they know what they're talking about. And I strongly recommend that your first stop after this conversation is to have a chat with Ben and team and to see what we can do to help you. Ben, any other words?
No, really, I appreciate those words. And it's important, not because necessarily, obviously we want business, but we want to help folks be safe. I mean, our goal is to make sure that we help our clients and help anyone we can to be properly defended, to be prepared for these types of threats. We spend a lot of time. We have a fantastic bench of engineers. I am nothing without the men and women that work here on our team at Burk, and they're all certified with Fortinet. They've all spent years in this space, working with firewalls, working with switches, understanding and learning about the Fabric, implementing these solutions. So we want to be able to help folks to navigate this challenge and to reduce these risks. Ultimately, the goal is let's mitigate these threats down to where they're manageable. They're small enough that when something happens in your organization, you have the right tools, you can weather that storm and come out on the other side a successful and profitable business.
Exactly right. Well said. Well said. So guys, one thing we haven't seen from you is if there are any questions. If you do have any questions, please type them up right now. We've got 7 minutes to the top of the hour. We'll be here for the rest of that 7 minutes. But I hope you found this useful or helpful, and get you some kind of insight into what security is. Look, security is complicated business, right? It can be complicated, and we recognize that. We are your experts. We want to be your trusted partner. All right. We want to help you look after your business, as Ben said, right? So you don't need to understand all of it. That's not the point. That's not the expectation over here. The expectation from this, or your key takeaway from this, is that there are people who know what they're talking about, have walked the walk and talk the talk, right? And so we're here to help you navigate through all of this. Navigate it in a very structured way. All right, it doesn't have to break the bank day one. There are steps that we take to this to build a good cybersecurity plan. So Lauren, why don't you come back? Have we got any questions out there right now?
Hi, I had one question come in through the chat privately, so I will give you both an opportunity to weigh in before we wrap up. This one says, on migrating to cloud, starting to move applications over, can you discuss, what I should be looking for security-wise?
Yeah. Ben, do you want to take a stab at that one? Do you want to start?
Sure. Be happy to. Anything you're doing with the cloud it starts with your vendor evaluation. Know who you're working with. Know where your data is going. Know where your systems are going. Make sure you've done your due diligence in terms of that vendor management component. Know who your cloud vendor is and make sure they're doing what they need to do. Secondly, make sure you evaluate how you're authenticating to that vendor and how you're transmitting data to and from that vendor. So is that data properly encrypted? Is it safe in transport and safe at rest once it gets there? And make sure your end users, when they're authenticating to that cloud resource, are doing so in a secure way. They're using multi-factor authentication, that they're limited only to what they need inside of that cloud vendor, and they're not exposed to data they don't need to be exposed to. But there's a lot of things you can look at, and fortunately, if you've got the right firewall technology, especially, you can monitor that traffic. You can bring that back through your corporate environment if you want to put additional restrictions as to how you access that cloud vendor, so it's not necessarily exposed to the entire world. That access to your component in the cloud has to flow through your corporate network, or you can secure it where it can flow through the internet, but you've got the right monitoring at that endpoint to know what's going on and know what your users are interacting with.
Yeah, very good points. All really good points. Yeah, the cloud is a cloudy place still for a lot of people, right? And needless to say, especially on the security side of things. Now, not knowing more about your infrastructure, there are certain solutions that Fortinet can put in place there as well, right? One of the new technologies which has been talked about or actually implemented now for quite some time is what we call SASE, or Secure Access Service Edge. It's a complicated acronym, but don't worry about it. It's really quite simple. What this does is we put a firewall out in the and it's very important, right? So today, what you're probably doing is, if you've got remote users, those remote users are using a VPN to get back into your data center, or not, or they're just using a VPN to terminate the VPN connection. And if your applications are out in the cloud, then that traffic then just kind of what we call hairpins back out to the cloud, right? That's not the most efficient way of pushing traffic, right? Pushing it up to somewhere to authenticate them and then pushing them out to the cloud. It just saturates your link back at your corporate headquarters, and it just introduces delay, latency, and then application issues happen along the way. Now, what we see is very typically a case such as yours, where organizations are pushing more and more applications up into the cloud. Now, what this does is we put a firewall out in the cloud. What we do is that traffic from the user goes up to that firewall, authenticates, and goes straight into that application, right? And that's a lot better. There's a number of things that are going on over there. Not only is your traffic flow optimized, which is good because you get better application performance, it also means that you've got application control as well. So the person who's sitting out in the field or up in the office, it doesn't matter where they are at this point in time, they always have a consistent and better user experience, right? And you can overlay, just like Ben said, two-factor authentication on top of that, and so on. But it's just a better user experience. But the systems are intelligent enough to know that, look, if I've got an application in my data center, I'm going to send the traffic that way. That's what the client does, right? Or if it knows that the application's up in the cloud, then it's just going to send the traffic straight to the cloud, not back to your corporate headquarters. What's the point? It's just silly, right? And it creates these inconsistencies in user experiences. So there's a lot that can be done there. And these are virtual firewall. They're not physical firewalls, right? They're just things that you just enable and turn up and turn on up in the cloud. And the way that we the build for that is very, very efficient in terms of licensing as well. Again, Ben and team can help you out with all of that. There is another layer on top of that, which is a very prominent way now of building out security, is what we call zero trust, or zero trust access. Ben, give us a brief of zero trust access and what that means. That could mean to people as well.
No, zero trust is a fantastic tool. It's the whole concept of every step in the process, from your connection to your endpoint, from your endpoint to another resource, from that resource to the cloud, or wherever it may be, that you're evaluating, should this user have that access? Is this appropriate? You're constantly re-authenticating, validating that traffic, validating that access to make sure that people don't end up places they shouldn't, or resources don't get access that shouldn't be accessed. It's a great mechanism to look at not only your remote access into your environment if you're working remotely, but everything inside your environment in terms terms of, should I have access to this server? Should I have access to this data on this server? Should I have access to this network segment? Validating all that through certificates, through authentication, through endpoint management, validating those endpoint clients, validating those network connections to switches to make sure that everything I have is appropriate. Basically, it's the whole idea of, we're not going to assume anything once you've made that first connection. We're going to validate everything along the path to make sure you stay safe and secure.
And again, it sounds, sophisticated and something an enterprise would deploy. Fortinet has done everything we can to make this suitable for even small businesses. It's not necessarily difficult to implement at the zero trust level or at the network security level. But that was a good question there. Definitely a good question and worthy of some conversation. Lauren, what else have we got? Anything else?
We do have, we had a couple more questions come in. So thank you for the questions. If we don't get to it in the next minute, we will follow up outside of the call. But last one would be, I have people using their work PCs on their home networks. While they should be using VPN for work purposes, what are some best practices aside from having a strong AV solution when they don't?
Yeah. So this is a good conversation, right? And this is what there's multiple different solutions over here. One would be the Linksys home working solution. That's very, very simple because it creates a public and a private network at your house. So it's a corporate network. And that is a tunnel all the way back to corporate. So that's absolutely secure. Well, the other way to do it is to install FortiClient and EDR, right? And that's just going to do all of that in the background for you, right? And you can implement Zero Trust or SASE on the top of it, just like we mentioned, right? So very good question, right? But all of those principles that we discussed today actually cover for that, right? And Ben and team can definitely help you out with that. Anything else to add to that, Ben?
No, I think to your point, the client's going to be your immediate mechanism to use. Make sure you're using the FortiClient to govern those firewalls, to scan for vulnerabilities, to make sure that EDR is in place, all of those things. And then depending on how that user works, then yes, definitely look at those solutions where you can actually have those SSIDs broadcast at the house and you can keep your personal life and your business life separate.
Yeah, exactly right.
Great. Thank you, Darius and Ben. Thanks so much for the examples. Thank you for the outline of what to consider when building a strong security posture. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. We hope you found the time well spent. If you have any questions or want more information after the session today, we will be following up and we will share the recording of today's session in case you want to review or share with any of your colleagues. But thank you again and hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you all.
Take care.